Hi, welcome back. So we're working with Pigeon today. So for many people, Pigeon is often a staple posture when it comes to hip openers in yoga. And really there's a lot of different variations that you can work with when it comes to Pigeon, depending on your body, depending on what you want to do to really focus in on your class or in your practice. And I'm hopefully going to give you some food for thought when it comes to Pigeon, and maybe some to-dos or not to-dos when it comes to this very dynamic posture. So Kathy's going to get into a tabletop position, and I'll be showing you some ways to get into Pigeon today as well. And this is probably by far the easiest way to get into Pigeon, is coming from tabletop, low profile. You don't have to worry about how tight your hips are. And we're going to just prop Kathy as well here too in just a second. I'm going to have Kathy come forward with her left leg. So from tabletop, exhale, just slide. Instead of stepping, Kathy, just slide your knee forward on your shin and come as far forward as you can until you can't bring it any further forward. And then simply sliding the back leg back, she's going to really start to feel this space in her groin from front knee to back toes as she wiggles her way down into the posture. Now, traditionally, or what many people are used to, is really striking the knee off to the side. And what ends up happening with that is if my forearm and fist are my knee, and so my hand back here is my pelvis, what ends up happening is we're just shoving that greater trochanter, the top of the hip, into the sacrum. Now, we don't need to shove bone into bone. So what we want to try to do instead is keep the femur more parallel with the edge of the mat, or front to back even, knee to hip. So when we line up, we're pushing the knee back into the glute tissue, where we really probably need that stretch in that space. So Kathy's lined up nicely. What you may find also with this variation is that you can't go as deep or go as far, and that's okay. We're not looking to splatter ourselves onto the floor. We're really looking to have a stretch worth having and be able to actually receive the benefits from a posture like this. So step 2, once you line up that front shin, is to decide where you want the foot of the front leg to go. So ideally what we're trying to do is angle that left foot over to the right groin. Now let's say you are super tight and restricted, and this is just a really challenging posture just to get into it. You may end up with that left foot kind of almost in line with the groin of that same leg. And that's okay. If that's where you're at, I want you to know that that's absolutely just fine. Don't feel like you have to start wrenching the shin off to the right if your left leg is forward, if it's just not going to go there today. So Kathy's lined up nicely. So now second step is to think about trying to square the hips, which is really going to enhance the stretch in the left glute, piriformis, and all of those deep hip muscles. So as Kathy tries to square, the hip of the front leg's trying to pull back, which may also increase the stretch through the hamstring. You might feel some kind of pinching stretching, which is those fascial layers. And then the hip of the back leg's trying to come forward. Now, for so many people, they go right into resting pigeon. And I want to propose maybe a different perspective with pigeon. Instead of just resting right away into resting pigeon, I want you to think about coming upright with your torso and really co-contracting your front core muscles. So think about tipping your front hip bones back, which is really going to start to load the stretch into the groin of the back leg. Now, if your hips are really tight, or maybe you have really short arms, I'm a lover of the props. So using blocks, one on each side of your body to help bring your spine more upright becomes a really great solution that you can kind of use your hands as stilts so you can really get into your hips a little bit more deeply. Now imagine really trying to press the groin of the back leg forward. So there's this constant intention of trying to square the hips. This is what's called an active hip stretch. Your body is contracting as it's releasing simultaneously. This is a really healthy variation for the deep hip rotators, and it's a really great way to also create space in the groin, which sometimes seems to be avoided in a pose like pigeon. So if I'm the teacher and I want to adjust Kathy as she's here, and I'm assuming this pose is probably pretty intense for her, so a couple of things we can look for is trying to help square the hips. It's just going to be very gentle. All I'm going to do is kind of guide her and let her decide how deep and how far she can go comfortably while she squares her hips. It is not necessary for you to wrench and push on someone, especially in their hips, in a pose like pigeon. This is just gentle guidance that you're offering them in this posture and letting them go as far as their body can take them. Second variation or adjustment that's very effective is actually a back leg rotation. I'm going to roll the thigh outward, and this may also help square the hips without actually pushing on the hips, and this may also create a deeper stretch in the groin. Now, if someone's complaining about knee pain, which is usually because the hip flexor is really tight in a pose like upright pigeon, you could easily pad the back knee with a cushion or a head pillow, a folded towel, or even the folded edge of your mat. That's a really easy, quick solution. Going all the way to the back leg, many times the back foot is crooked or on some sort of an angle due to the nature of how they're holding tension in their body. And just a simple readjustment of the back foot is a nice little reminder to help them create length all the way through the back leg. Now, if this is bothersome for the ankle, you can also pad the ankle to help create support, especially if maybe they have very little extension through the top of the foot and that causes any sort of pain and discomfort. All right, so now we're really going to challenge pigeon. She's going to stay here. I know Kathy's been here a while. And she's going to try to create this pigeon and become a little bit more active even now. And so on the exhalation, while she's here, she's going to hug her thighs internally as deeply as she can. And see what happens if maybe she even tries to take her hands off the blocks, maybe even tries to reach her arms towards the ceiling, interlacing her fingers steeple the pointer fingers. So now this is a great example again of what's called an active hip stretch, which is challenging in its nature. You're not really going deep, quote unquote, to what we think, but this is a really great, safe way to challenge the hip. And now she's also getting a great back challenge as well. Okay, so now she's done this for a while. Her hands are going to come down gently. And if she does want to come forward, exhaling, folding forward into more of a passive pigeon. As she comes forward, she can use her forearms for support. She can either bring her forearms to blocks if she was maybe a little bit stiffer or tighter. She can also place her forehead on the edge of a block and massage that third eye point on the center of the forehead. If she is a little bit stiffer or a little bit tighter, you can also offer them a cushion or some sort of a support underneath the glute of the front hip. You could have also offered this to them when you were upright as well, but this is just another prop solution. Now, how long do you keep someone here in a passive pigeon? And that's really controversial. So some say that being in passive pigeon too long can definitely create a little bit more inflammation or kind of the wrong kind of stretch in the deep rotators of the hip. And some people say otherwise, that it's not. It's really good for the hip. It's really great for those deep hip rotators. And so I really want to leave this up to you. I would say that 30 seconds is probably a great kind of starting ground, maybe a little bit longer than that, but definitely listen to your body and clue into some of those warning signs that this pose may be going too far. Whenever you feel anything hot, shooting, or sharp, whenever you feel anything numbness or creating tingling that doesn't subside, that's a great signal that your body is saying, okay, I've had enough. I need to come out of this posture. So let's say you're done with this passive pigeon now. How do you get out of the pose? A couple of different ways. I'm just going to remove this cushion from Kathy. One, she could easily just come part way up and on the exhalation roll off to her right hip and swing her back leg forward, roll off to her left hip and swing the back leg forward. And she kind of ends up in a seated position. I like that transition when you're kind of ready to go right onto your back or you're going to do some sort of seated postures. It's just a really nice transition and most people really enjoy it, especially if the rest of the class is going to be kind of low key. If I have Kathy come into pigeon on the other side, just for the sake of doing it at least for a little while. Another way to come out of pigeon would be to simply roll the back toes under. And using some core strength and arm strength, she's going to start to lift her hips high enough to free the back leg into downward facing dog. This is often a transition many people use if they're going to come through a sequence actively on the opposite side. She could have equally drawn the back leg into tabletop again as well as another variation to come out of the pose. So if she was forward with, let's say again, her right leg, And then again, same thing, she's going to start to roll the back toes under, maybe start to lift the hips, and just simply slide back more so into a tabletop position. At what point maybe she wants to extend the leg and stretch that hip out, really move in a way that her body seems most comfortable. So way in the beginning, I had Kathy come into pigeon from tabletop, but now if she goes back into downward facing dog again, I'm just going to show you a transition many people use. And this one is absolutely appropriate, maybe not necessarily for new beginners, but it's definitely one once people are versed in poses like down dog or in poses like pigeon, becomes very natural or a comfortable transition. So if Kathy let's say her right leg up towards the sky, and then on the inhalation comes high to the ball of the back foot, exhale rolling through her spine, she's actually going to pick up her right hand a little bit if necessary and slide on the shin, bringing the front leg as far forward as she can. She's going to slide right into pigeon. And then she can do that same thing again, just squaring the hips as much as she feels naturally comfortable. She could even check her own back leg. Is the leg actually right behind the hip? Or have her hips kind of skewed the leg off to the side or even in to cross the center line. So those are easy things that you could easily encourage your students to do themselves, because I don't think any teacher ever wants to have to go around and fix every single student in the class for something so minor like that. So one of the big things we can always think about is, what can I tell my students that they can do themselves so that they can fix their own posture or they can help their own posture. And I'm a big believer in self-adjustments. I think it's a really safe way for people to adjust themselves, and it's a great way to create body awareness. And so like Kathy has been doing, she squared her own hips. She adjusted her own front leg. She checked her own back leg. And she as well can easily grab her own prop and slide that underneath her glute or even grab her own blocks. So really creating a self-education for your students allows them to actually go home and do the postures themselves and practice the postures safely and effectively. So now Kathy has a great upright pigeon. She's doing a lot of really great work in both the back groin, the groin of the back leg, and the hip of the front leg. If by chance she at any times feels pinching or any sort of tweaking in the sacrum or the lower back in a pose like pigeon, especially if she's upright, that's usually the first sign that the hips need to square a little bit more. And so that may mean that she has to prop herself up on a cushion. But if that's the solution, why aren't we doing it? So don't feel like the floor is the goal in any posture, really, but rather the goal is to be able to find freedom in the body and begin to find space where there isn't any. Great.